Hello, everybody. Welcome back here to Deadlock and Load, episode 23. My name is Cryptic here with BSJ. We just want to say thank you all so much for tuning in. And before we jump into the episode, if you could do us a massive favor and either like or subscribe to the channels, wherever it is, it would help us out a ton. But let's go ahead and jump in to episode 23. BSJ, how you feeling, man?
Yeah, man. Dream League, it's not a sprint. It is a marathon. We are doing potentially 14 straight days of work. Tiebreakers is the what I mean by potentially. If there's no tiebreakers, we'll get one day off in 14. This patch of Dota is in they're in a gridlock in regards to a lot of the games are going really long. So what usually is maybe like 7 to 8 hour days has been an average of like 10 to 12 hour days. There's one best of three series the other day that lasted 6 hours. So it's been a bit of a doozy. Yeah, it's a rough one. For people who can't see his expression, there's some visible shock there. But yeah, I'm on day 9 right now. Just finished day 9. So not the streamer, but the ninth day out of 14. But honestly, I've been trying to tune in to some Deadlock streams just to kind of keep up with what's going on. It's kind of a nice break from Dota, and I'm really feeling the MOBA itch lately. So I'd say like the patch in Dota has been exciting. The Deadlock new patch is having time to settle in. There's a lot of things to be grateful for in all of that. So it's not like we're stuck in some I feel like if it was like a month and a half ago in Deadlock and maybe like 3 weeks ago in Dota and all of this was happening, I would be having a lot less fun, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. We are in a pretty good spot right now. I feel like obviously anyone who's a Dota player is happy they got their big Dota patch, and right in the middle of Dream League, as is tradition. It feels. But for Deadlock gamers out there, it seems we're also kind of feasting pretty heavily. Like we we had the major shop rework update. Gosh, that has been it's been the beginning of the month, so almost 3.5, almost 4 weeks maybe. Let me find the actual date. It was like the 8th or something, 8th or 11th. It was the 8th. Yeah. So we had the patch on the 8th. So it's been actually pretty much 3 weeks since that happened. A couple small updates since then. We had two additional updates here in the last like week and a half that just trying to like round out some of the edge cases of issues of things that maybe were a little bit too strong, as is like tradition with kind of like post big patches. But it seems that Dota or that Deadlock players are really enjoying it, right? Like we talked about the player base obviously peaking a lot after the update, and we're kind of wondering like, will that actually hold? And here we are 3 weeks later, and surprise, it held. Like actually, like it's as stayed entirely consistent across the last 3 weeks at just around 20,000 players, which I think is a really good sign.
Yeah, it's definitely, we were mentioning it's a step in the right direction going from 14K up to 20K. That's a solid almost 50% increase. And, the question begs, why are people sticking around? I feel like I feel like for me, it's a lot about the fact that the items have their own identity. We talked about that a lot last week. Whenever I've been tuning in, I see a lot more build varieties. I feel like the item timings are just much more exciting, and it's also just much more dynamic in regards to the gameplay that I'm witnessing. The games seem to have a healthy blend of when they're ending. Sometimes I tune in and it's kind of a convincing stomp at like 25, 30 minutes and other times it can get stalled out a little bit. I think the visual updates of the base have really hit me hard every time every time I'm like, oh shit, it's still like I'll be like watching them jumping around the map and the first 20 minutes of the game, and then I'll see them pushing and I'm like, it's so weird to see them walking up like a throne looking building that's like almost like a royal castle rather than kind of what I feel like used to be a meager fortress that was beat up over the course of the years. I feel like all of these extra little visual cues I think are making people more curious. Also, the people sticking around, it just makes you feel, I don't want to say more welcome, but I just think, I mentioned a few weeks ago that this is the type of stuff that makes people feel like the developers really care about their game when you take the time to spice it up a little bit, whether it's the visuals on the items, the visuals in the game. And I think it's really palpable, especially as a spectator, And if you guys are out there and you haven't given it a shot yet, I definitely encourage you to do so. How are you feeling? Uh, obviously, I would say, since we've talked about this a bit, you would agree with me, but is there anything else on top of this that you feel like is responsible for keeping the people here?
I think some of it might just be the general happiness of the player base. Like, if you think back to where we were like a few months ago, it was starting to get a little bit into like a toxic kind of hole of people like constantly complaining about like matchmaking, and there wasn't a lot of things where people were like really excited about or happy about. It's like we went from the 4 lane update to the 3 lane update, but that didn't really change a lot of the like major problems I think that people were experiencing in their games. Yes, it made the game better. Like that's undeniable, right? We know the game is better from being on 3 lanes now as opposed to 4. But I think a lot of people were experiencing some of just like the same issues from game to game, and it never really got better. And I think we're in a situation now where the general kind of vibe, like if we're doing a vibe check on the community, like now, whereas where we were like 3 months ago, it is a completely different community. Like, we just have generally, I think the content creators in the Deadlock scene are pretty optimistic and positive, which I think is a very good thing to have. Now, there are some standouts that are undeniably toxic, and people don't really I would say don't people don't really like pay much attention to them as a result. I think
Would
people generally
I was
go
gonna
for
say
it.
I don't want you to like name names, but I was also thinking like what type of toxic content are you seeing out there? Because I haven't come across any of this.
Like there's like your typical streamers that are just there for rage bait, like just rage content. Like
Uh,
like they don't really do anything else. Like all they do is go out there and they just be toxic, and it's like it's some people find that as entertaining, but for the most part, I think most people are off put by it, and there's a reason that like those aren't the content creators in the forefront of Deadlock, right? Whereas in other games that like there are some content creators that is their stick, and they are the number one most watched content creator for whatever category, which is depressing. But I think that's one of the nice things that I've seen so far about the Deadlock community. I think just generally as well, there's a lot of people who have been coming back from long breaks. Obviously, we see that in the numbers of the player count, but I think a lot of people who took a break after honestly like like the ranked system came out. I think that was the big blow. The first major blow to the player base was the introduction of ranked. I think a lot of people are starting to come back and be optimistic and wanting to try the game again, and are being like pleasantly surprised. And like that just adds to this kind of like positive kind of community that Deadlock has. And maybe I'm seeing things with like rose tinted glasses. Like maybe not everyone, like obviously not everyone feels this way, but I think in general, the vibe of the Deadlock community as a whole is a lot more positive right now than it was like 3 months ago.
yeah, I mean, I was kind of getting that as well when I was watching the streams. I also feel like before the people who were only watching, so I primarily watch Mikkel's. I just think he's really high skill and interesting to watch, and he also is on at the time that I'm
Yeah,
not
it's your time
working.
zone.
But I feel like before this patch, people were more so just watching him because he's really good, and they were just like, "Wow, amazing plays," which is fine and all. But one thing I noticed as a drastic shift in his chat environment, at least the times that I've tuned in, is that people were like discussing builds. They were like theory crafting stuff. They were questioning like why he was doing what he was doing, and to me, that shows a shift in vibe of people rather than just watching to be impressed. They're actually watching to learn and get better at the game. And that shows that more people are playing the game. That shows that people are inspired, maybe perhaps reinvigorated to get better at the game. You know, I actually had a discussion about Deadlock with one of the guys in production. I'm not going to name names, but I'm almost certain you know him. But one of the
Probably.
guys in production who used to play Deadlock, and it was really funny because this was from one of our episodes, probably like 4 or 5 months ago, that I talked about how one of the worst parts about Deadlock that I felt was pushing players away was the fact that I was a huge Haze Wraith main, and it felt like every patch, like these two heroes had this happen a lot specifically, but it did happen to other heroes. that rather like every patch was so significantly changing the hero identity that rather than having a hero to retreat to when I want to play like comfortably and have a hero that I kind of know what I'm doing, I would always be on the learning curve. And I feel like now what they've done, and I feel like it's the similar approach to Dota, what keeps people coming back, is you want heroes to almost be like your comfort zone. You know, you have heroes that you rely on, that you feel like you understand better than most because you've played them a lot. And then when all of the chaos around them changes, you know, all these new items, all these, like, the map is consistently changing. For me, I like to think of the heroes as the anchor that makes there be sense in this world of Deadlock. As I feel like that's how I felt about Dota, because no matter how much they change the map, I always know my favorite heroes in Dota, and I'm always able to figure out how they fit into this new system. And back then, I was like, I don't feel like I have a grounding source because they kept changing the heroes, and I think since they stopped doing that predominantly, obviously they're still rebalancing. Some heroes need some tweaks here and there, but I feel like they stopped adjusting the identities of heroes so much, and that I see these people, like, there's enough that makes sense that even though there's a bunch of new items and it is exciting, but it's also like could be intimidating. I don't think it's intimidating in a way that scares people off. It's intimidating in a way that, like, I need to overcome my quote unquote fear of like the unknown. You know, I need to approach this with some curiosity, and that's what I was seeing in the chats. I feel that way when I'm watching the game. I'm like, oh, like, haven't seen that item yet because there's so many new ones. Um, and so yeah, that's what I feel like. I don't know if that resonates with you, but it did resonate with Lewis. I named him. Fuck.
Oh, I can't believe you said that.
Name bomb. Name. No, nobody knows him. But it resonated with him about the fact that he did agree that that's how it used to be. That they were doing that too much, but the fact that they stopped doing that, and I think they're changing them the better things, I would say.
Yeah, I think that it also helps that it's just a lot less often, right? This was
True.
back during like the 2 week cycle where it was like just keep throwing things to the wall. We'll see what sticks and what we want to keep. Whereas like now our update cycle is very much like we have kind of your general large patches where these are things that have been in development behind the scenes. They've been testing stuff for a while. Then it launches, and once we have a lot of data on, you know, what people are doing, what people are building, how things are being played, then we get a couple tweaks here and there. And I think that's a lot healthier for that type of relationship you were just talking about with people and their favorite heroes. Like I have the same thing. Like whenever a patch comes out and I'm like, I don't really know what to do. I don't want to go also jump on a hero I'm not super familiar with. Like I'm gonna go play Abrams or I'm gonna go play Infernus because these are my two heroes that I have played a decent amount with, and I feel like I understand like the core idea of how I'm supposed to play them or how I want to play them. And then it's just like adding these extra puzzle pieces into it, right? Trying to figure out where these new items can either enhance or augment my builds in different ways, or how the map changes can affect how you would want to rotate or do stuff like that. Like there's there's a lot of to be said around that kind of, like you said, comfort zone that people have with heroes. And I think you're right. I hadn't really thought about that. That's actually a really cool point. It does make a big difference, like being able to kind of offset some of the chaos of a new patch by just going back to something that you're comfortable on, and then kind of maneuvering your way through that kind of period until you feel a little bit more comfortable and you're like, all right, time to branch back out, learn some new stuff, play new heroes, you know, do whatever you want. It's a game of exploration for sure, and trial and error, like as with any MOBA.
Yeah, I think now that I'm hearing you respond, and I'm like, and I just tried articulating it, I think the big difference is when I say I learned Haze, you know, in the old days, and they changed the idea of the hero and the items that are good on it and all that kind of stuff. I felt like everything I learned about Haze prior just didn't matter anymore. Like, I felt like I had spent, you know, I'd sunk 30 games, 50 games of this hero. I remember I was playing McGinnis back then as well, and they were tweaking her a shit ton. And I spent probably 50 to 70 games playing McGinnis, and I felt, oh man, I understand this hero so well. And then they changed it to the point where I'm like, yeah, I know how to use the wall, but that's like about the only transferable skill that I felt like I got from those games. And like when you go into a new patch, you feel rewarded. You're like, oh, a bunch of new stuff. but I also feel like I'm kind of ahead of the curve because I also have a really good understanding of the hero that I'm choosing to play, and I'll probably apply the changes to Abrams or Infernus faster than people who haven't been playing. When it's like they changed the identity of Wraith, and I'm just like, what do I do now? You know, like people who could just start playing the game now would probably have half as good of an understanding of Wraith in like 3 or 4 games than I do because of the fact that so much got changed. So I really do think in Dota, this because I've lived through like 12 years of Dota patches, that was something I always appreciated, and it was definitely lost on me probably about 3 months into Deadlock, where it started to feel like things were a waste of time to some degree. Like this desire to learn was not being rewarded properly, and that definitely shifted with this recent patch. I feel like so many of these things I'm now seeing like this is finalized. You know, this is the
Yeah.
identity of this hero. This is what the shop's gonna look like. There's always gonna be new things, but it's worth cementing my understanding of this.
Yeah, and I think that is, gosh, I don't know how else to really explain it outside of what you said. Yeah, I feel like I'm just really happy with the way it's being patched now. And like you said, that certain things feel finalized. Obviously, outside of the cosmetic stuff, like things are going to be tweaked. In that regard, a lot of stuff's getting new models. Um, but yeah, it's like if you have a specific play style that you like from whatever game you're coming from, right? If you're a Dota or a League player and you're like, I play carries, or if you're like, I'm a mid player, like these archetypes of heroes exist in Deadlock now, and they feel and play that way. And I think that's the fun thing about it now, is like you have this scenario of, if you come from other games, like you can definitely find a hero that you're gonna vibe with, and that can just be your, it's not like you're a one trick, but there is a category of heroes that kind of fit into it, and you can kind of experiment and learn those different ways. Like I don't know. Like when you think about like heroes like Abrams, Mo and Krill, stuff like that, like these tanky initiators and just like kind of like fight disruptors. Like you think about them, they're very much one-on-one comparisons to a lot of these like types of heroes in other games. Like just Dota alone, you can kind of think of Abrams as like a Magnus in a way, right? Like he is just this in your face, pull people out of position or like force team fights, and he's really hard to kill and punish for it. So it's like it's cool that we have like you said, kind of these like finished feelings of heroes in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I actually laughed because this is like a slight change of subject, but I feel like there were so many times where we were watching Deadlock changes that were like they did that in Dota and they just brought that over, and that was something we were like, there's a lot of new things we like, but we also want to dip into the old stuff. So in the new Dota patch, it's the first time I've seen this, by the way. In the new Dota patch, they added queue up an item to buy it. So like when your hero walks by the shop, you buy it, and I'm like, they took that from Deadlock. You know,
You're like, that's a Deadlock
that's
change.
a Deadlock thing. I thought that was like really funny to see the fact that that was now that streets potentially two ways, that they're actually able to potentially innovate within Deadlock and pull like, wow, that was a good idea. We really like that quality of life change. Let's put it in the game that's been around for freaking 15 years. It just shows that I feel like they're really settling into. I call them one step pivots. It's actually a concept I've really started thinking about a lot in my life because I kind of went through like this, what am I doing with my streaming career about a year ago, just because I was getting a bit burnt out. And the one step pivot for me is where the situation is familiar enough to what you're used to, but it's just kind of changing the direction a little bit. You're not taking a U-turn, you're not taking a full 90-degree, but you're just like, maybe you're in a boat and you're like, I'm just gonna maybe nudge myself a different direction. And it's like in the short term, you don't feel any difference, but in the long term, you're gonna end up at a completely different spot because of that. And I feel like that's how Deadlock changes have been happening, and it's a lot less jarring. It's a lot less jarring, and it also feels like I'm able to follow their train of thought much better. I also think that's why they're even able to reverse engineer it back into Dota, whatever they're changing. Because I feel like they have these they've more have Dota and Deadlock going in the same direction since they've put back the 3 lanes and they've I feel like the items in Deadlock remind me much more of the items in Dota now with how much identity they have to each one. So I feel like they've reverted enough that they're like, okay, we had done like a full U-turn or like a full 90-degree away from the MOBA idea. And now that I feel like these two games are kind of in parallel, I'm excited about the fact that I feel like these two games are actually going to feed into each other. Every Dota update could potentially impact the way Deadlock is changed, and vice versa. Um, yeah, and that was just something I laughed at when I saw the new Dota update. That was super hype for me.
Dude, how okay, speaking of the overlap, what is the chance that like a Deadlock hero gets added to Dota eventually? Right? Like these are like it could I think theoretically they could do it, right? If they wanted to port in like one of the iconic heroes of Deadlock into Dota.
I have
I
another
feel like it's a
hypothetical. I
possibility.
have another
All right,
hypothetical, okay?
hit me.
So in Dota, for people who are only Deadlock fans, they gave about a year ago they gave heroes facets, which means that at the start of every game, there's kind of like two different ways to play the hero. Sometimes it actually completely changes the identity of the hero. Sometimes it kind of just determines which spell you'd play around. But the point that I thought was really cool about the facets, now that I've seen them play out for about a year, is that it's a excuse me, it's allowing them to test features of heroes that they can also just see if people like it. Jenkins made a really interesting point because he's designing a game right now that they added a new facet recently on a hero called Clockwork. That's absolutely terrible. But the pick rate of the hero like tripled. And they're like, huh, this like so people love this. That's actually feedback that people love this despite the fact that it's terrible. And so my you're talking about porting a hero from Deadlock into Dota. What about Deadlock facets? What about the idea of what I liked about facets in hindsight is you're able to implement changes where, okay, say I know how to play Wraith in its given state right now. One of the facets keeps Wraith pretty much as is right now, and then the other facet is the equivalent of what they did, back like 6 months ago, where they're like, okay, she does a little bit less gun damage, but her ult's a stun now. Something like this, that they can then see, do people like this? And it's more like tested in a way that isn't as jarring for the player. And one thing that's interesting that Dota did was, I'll give an example. One of the heroes in the game, Earthshaker, his facet, one of the facets that came out was whenever he kills a hero or an enemy creep with an ability, that body goes flying. And people just took that facet every single time because it's fucking cool to see bodies go flying. And so what they ended up doing was they just made it a part of the hero. Like they just removed that facet, said, okay, that's actually just part of the hero now. People love this. And that's the kind of iteration of changes that I think could be incorporated into Deadlock as well. So I'm just saying, I think there's absolutely a chance that maybe a hero like Mirage, would go into Dota. I feel like I'm thinking of like a hero that turns into a tornado, like immune kind of thing. I really like that spell potentially in Dota. I feel like there's bits and pieces of that. With like heroes that lift you up, like Rubik, or heroes that become immune or like pounce themselves in a specific direction. But I think there are cool spells like Deadlock that absolutely could be included in Dota. That was the first one that occurred to me. Was there one that immediately you were like, that hero would fit really well in Dota from Deadlock? Was there any hero that fit that for you?
I mean the two heroes that I play them for the very much the same reason that I feel like to me they are like iconic to the game and they kind of play like Dota heroes. Like
Hmm.
you know, I think Infernus is like the Shadow Fiend
Yeah,
of
you
this
talking
game.
about him? He's the
Like
swagger guy.
he's got the swagger. He's so iconic, and I think like his kit could be really fun in Dota for sure. Abrams, like we kind of have heroes like him, but there's not really something too similar to Infernus. I guess he's like a kind of a He like for his role, I guess. But they're kind of are making Batrider that with his new facets. So I don't know.
I feel like that
Um,
Batrider facet was actually
it
inspired
might.
by Infernus because Infernus and Batrider, for people who don't play Dota, have two overlapping spells to some degree, like
Yeah,
Firefly and Flame
and
Dash,
napalm slash.
uh,
Yeah, yeah,
and are like the same spell kind of. And then you have Napalm
catalyst.
and
Yeah,
Catalyst. Like it's funny because I don't even like I just know what the abilities do. And but then at the same time, you know, Batrider in Dota is not at all based on damage. So it's like imagine if Furnace just didn't have his passive. You know, he's not a hero that's meant to shoot you with his gun. That's Batrider in Dota. But then in Dota, they're like, okay, let's actually make this hero play around damage with one of his facets. And so I'm wondering, like, what if Infernus got a facet where his third spell was more utility rather
yeah,
than being a passive that synergizes with your gun. Because I at one point I loved playing spellcasting in Furnace. I loved when you could play
yeah.
like superior cooldown, superior duration, and Flame Dash made you unslowable, and I was like, wee, like you know, and then Echo Shard as well. And it's like, what if my third spell actually played around that? That would be kind of fucking cool because at the end of the day, I think Infernus has his identity. I don't want them to remove his passive, but at the same time, what if? You know, there's
Yeah.
potential
Well,
there. I'm just saying.
I have to wonder that if we ever get something like Facets in Deadlock, if they would do something like change the gun for the hero. Like you load
Hmm.
into the game and you're like, like I'm gonna like because certain heroes have alt fires, but what if like your hero has a completely different set of guns?
Yeah, Infernus shoots
And
with his right hand instead of his left hand.
yeah, of course. Yeah, like it's just completely different. No, but like that would be a way that we could see them somehow introduce facets that augment the playstyle for your hero. Maybe like maybe maybe McGinnis has like her light machine gun that she normally has, and maybe in other times she's uh her machine gun is more for her damage build, and then like maybe on other games like she actually has like a utility weapon of some kind that is like built around her support build, which could be a thing. I don't really know what exactly they would do, but
I feel like
it's just
the
something
limits
I've thought
are
about.
endless. I feel
Yeah.
like the limits on that are endless. So I guess like I was just thinking a lot about how with the changes to Deadlock feeling a lot more I would say peaceful and fluid. That I was it also got me to thinking like a lot of people complain about Dota that heroes don't have two good facets. And I'm like, if you
Yeah.
really think about the game design standpoint, it's super important to not just take a community of like, you know, they're used to a game looking a certain way and just completely throwing a massive freaking wrench in it that leaves people just confused. And I view the facets as a cool way to experiment with things. And I think in Deadlock, there's probably some middle ground between what they're currently doing and what they did like 6 months ago. I think there's middle
Yeah.
ground for that because there's a lot of room for experimentation still. You know, if you added facets, theoretically, that does double the hero pool in regards to options, while
Hmm.
also not giving people a
Having to
ton
design
of,
20 new heroes.
yeah, design 20 new heroes, present people with a ton of new information. You know, that's what I mean by like the one step pivot. You know, it's like, hey, I get to try spellcasting in Furnace, not playing around his gun. I already understand how this hero's kit works. Now I have to figure out how to make it work with different items, you know, maybe playing more around spirit power or something like this. Um, and I think that could be, you know, after they add, because they what do they have, like still like 10 heroes in testing labs. I
Yep.
feel like
10
after,
more.
yeah, I feel like after you add those, or even sometime in the middle, depending on how finalized the hero concepts are, that's something they could definitely consider. I'm curious what the people listening think. I'm curious, you know, how that sounds to everybody. But I've also been talking a lot to Jenkins and Sons fan because they're finishing their Relic Arena game, and I always get some really interesting perspective of what game devs have to consider. And there's a lot of ways to fuck up, you know? And I will say, I think my last point that I'd like to make about the fact that the player base is sticking around is I feel like the faith, the vibes that you talked about earlier, I think can also largely be due to the fact that people, I think, are gaining more and more trust that Valve's going to make good changes. You know, like all of these changes have been in the right direction. We don't always know what we need. We sometimes know what we want, but we don't know what we need. And I feel like what they've been giving is what the Deadlock community needed. And now I know what I want, which is Facets and Deadlock. But a man will dream big. We'll just have to see.
Honestly, I'm kind of with you where I feel like when they are done with these next 10 heroes, which could be coming sooner, let's hope we can cross our fingers. I feel like there's 4 5 heroes almost done. So like those could be coming out here once we get into June, and we kind of theory crafted that like June July was going to be like the big announcement, for Deadlock. So I feel like we're getting there pretty close, and we're coming down to the wire in terms of what we would like to see from Valve. But obviously, they're gonna release it when they release it. That's just how Valve does things. Um, but yeah, once we have those, dude, Facets could definitely be like the next step. Like rather than like we were saying, like just adding more heroes, like Facets could completely augment the game and make things even more interesting with the current with the current hero pool, and we'll see what they end up doing. I wouldn't surprise me in any regard if they go down that route, just because it. I mean, the data is there. It worked in Dota. It worked really well in Dota. There was like a period of which like where some of the facets weren't great, but we're doing it on a much smaller sample size this time as opposed to like on 117 heroes you have to make a bunch of facets for all at once. It's like making the facets for the 40 core heroes in Deadlock seems like a much more achievable goal for it to be successful, like with all of them, right? You may have like a couple here and there that aren't great, but I feel like it's definitely doable for them to come up with like some ideas for each of the heroes. Yeah, I'm about it. That seems cool to me. I like that.
Nice. I got one person sold. Now on to the other 20,000.
Hey, you just gotta convince them all one at a time. Get their phone numbers, call BSJ.
I'll send out some
Uh,
community emails.
yeah, of course. There we go. That's great. I love that. Um, today I think with this episode our idea was to try and keep it just a little bit shorter, and kind of save some of the big meaty episodes for the large, very peepo wide updates, which could be coming any day. But to avoid from overloading you guys with just tons and tons of Deadlock content, we're gonna keep this one, I think, a little bit shorter. So how about we jump into our last segment, which is the what did I learn this week? How about that, Brian? You okay
Yeah,
with
I
that?
think I think you went first last week. I guess before we jump into it real quick, I'm curious.
Okay.
Please, guys, if you're listening, let us know what you think about an episode like this. I think a large portion of the goal that we were aiming for is that there's a lot of things that we think about as gamers that tie into Deadlock and that are not purely Deadlock related, but it also, like, for me, I felt like this led to a lot of theory of like, could that work in Deadlock?
Hmm.
I felt like a lot of this was more so theory crafting, and for me that's like, I feel like that's kind of cool to feel like you and I are shooting the shit about what we're thinking could possibly happen. And there's not
Yeah.
always going to be fresh new content, and thought it was a good idea to potentially a good idea to fill the void between all of these massive updates. And there's not always a ton to talk about. So yeah, definitely let us know what you guys think about that. Would love to hear it. But yeah, I guess the thing I learned this week, um, man, so actually, I guess my what I learned this week is that there's a lot of good things that went overdone. It's a little bit personal to share, so I'm not going to share the example, but good things went overdone, or when you don't necessarily understand why it's good, uh, it can kind of backfire sometimes, where you're like, oh, I felt like I did all the things I wanted to do, and it should work out. And then you feel like, well, I feel like shit after all that. What happened? And then um, so I guess for me, it was a reminder that sometimes you feel like things went well and then they didn't, and you're wondering why. And it's like, oh, I can't just assume that that thing is good in every single scenario. That certain things that, like, the things that I consider good for myself have like a positive effect for a given reason. And just because something's a positive effect at this point does not mean it'll be a positive effect at that point. and then I found myself confused why it wasn't working. And so, just a reminder out there, gained a little bit of self awareness this week. I guess that's what I feel like I learned.
I like that. That's nice.
Thank you, thank you. What
Um,
about you?
for me, this was so some context. I actually just got back in like late this morning, like 1:30 this morning,
Oof.
from a flight. So yeah, it was great. Like 4.5 hours of delays, but finally made it home. But yeah, this last weekend I actually took some time off to go on like a trip with some of my like oldest friends, like people that I've known literally since preschool. And I think while I was there, it kind of hit me again where it's like life is just really fast. Uh,
True.
the one thing that I've been told that I don't think about often, but when I do, it hits hard is like the days are long, but the years are fast. Is like a
Hmm.
really good saying where it's like, yeah, like every once in a while you're doing something during the day and you're like, man, it drags, but then you look back at the last like 3 years and it is a blur almost. Like it just goes very quickly. And so the thing I learned this week is that it is important to make time for the things in your life that are important. Like it's one of those things that to me, like my friends have always been kind of like anchors in my life. Like whatever industry it is that I'm in, like I've always had like and made good friends that make me keep coming back. But sometimes you just need to take some time off and get away from the world, the craziness, and just like go spend time with, or doing the important things to you. It doesn't have to be people, it can be whatever it is to you. It can be travel, it can be hiking, can be just laying on a beach. I don't know. But finding the time to do things that are important to you, I think is, uh, yeah, something that kind of hit home again this last weekend.
Yeah, I like the days are long and the years are short. I like that one. I think that's a good way to sum up that entire feeling. Definitely vibe with that one. Yeah, man. Nice to hear it, man. I enjoyed this episode, so I hope the people listening did.
Same.
How did you feel?
Yeah, it was fun. This is a cool one where we just kind of like chat, shoot the shit, and kind of riff on what we're feeling. And we didn't really have like a lot of episodes will have a set guideline. We're like, these are the specific topics we want to hit. And this one, we're like, we could, or we can kind of just see where the conversation goes. And I kind of like this one. It actually felt nice. So let us know what you guys think. Like what Brian said, if you like this episode, let us know in the comments, or just give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channels, whatever it is that you want to do. We appreciate it. But that does bring episode 23. It is episode 23, right? Oh my goodness.
Nailed it first
It
try.
is. Nice. First try. That will bring episode 23 of Deadlock and Load to an end. So we want to say thank you all so much for tuning in. And we will see you all next week with hopefully some more great Deadlock stuff.
See ya.